I'm Lieutenant Colmona James, 34, and I built my career from nothing but grit, discipline, and a stubborn belief that I could serve at the highest level. For years, I quietly held my family together, stepping in, supporting, sacrificing, doing whatever it took to keep the people I love safe. But when my sister's ex turned dangerous and my own mother brushed off her fear, I drew a line that changed everything. Have you ever been dismissed, betrayed, or minimized by someone you'd go to war for? If you have, tell me your story in the comments. You're not the only one. Before I take you through what happened, tell me where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to reclaim your voice after someone tried to silence it, tap like and subscribe for more real stories about boundaries, protection, and finally choosing yourself. What unfolded next even I didn't see coming. I worked in threat assessment for years. I could read a room in seconds, gauge intent from body language, spot red flags most people dismissed as quirks. But watching my younger sister Emily slip into something dangerous and watching my mother refuse to see it was different. This wasn't a briefing. This was my family. Emily mentioned Tyler casually at first. A guy she'd been seeing for a few months. Nice enough, she said. Worked in tech. Liked hiking. The details were vague, which itself felt like a detail worth noting. I was home on leave captain at that point, 03, still climbing, and I watched them together at a family barbecue. He showed up without an invitation, which Emily tried to laugh off as spontaneous. But her laugh had an edge, a performance quality that made me look closer. Tyler touched her constantly. Hand on her lower back, arm around her shoulders, fingers grazing her wrist when she reached for her drink. Each touch looked affectionate from a distance. Up close, they looked like claims. When Emily mentioned going to her friend Sarah's birthday party, Tyler smiled and said, "We'll see how you feel that day." The phrasing stuck with me. Not, "we should go together" or "have fun." Just that quiet erasure of her autonomy, wrapped in concern. Mom loved him immediately. She kept saying how attentive he was, how rare it was to find a man who cared so much. When I asked Emily if he always needed to know where she was, she brushed it off. He just likes staying connected, she said. Connected. As if surveillance was affection. I started noticing smaller things. Emily stopped wearing certain outfits. She'd glance at her phone constantly, responding to messages within seconds. When I asked about her painting, something she'd loved since high school, she said she didn't have time anymore. Tyler needed help with projects. Tyler wanted her input on apartment hunting. Tyler thought her art hobby was cute but not practical. The grip test came during that first dinner. Tyler shook my hand hard enough to send a message, his smile never shifting. I've dealt with enough posturing officers to recognize dominance displays. I smiled back and held his gaze until he let go first. Mom noticed none of it. When Emily mentioned Tyler wanted her to share her location indefinitely, Mom said it was sweet. When Tyler commented that Emily's skirt was a bit much for a family dinner, Mom agreed it was short. When he corrected Emily's story about where they'd met, talking over her until she went quiet, Mom called it having a good memory. I tried talking to Emily alone. She deflected, insisted I was reading too much into things, said my training made me see threats everywhere. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was projecting. But I'd seen enough control patterns in my career to know the difference between caution and instinct. The rail warning came 2 weeks later. Emily called me from her car, voice shaking. She'd gone to lunch with Sarah without telling Tyler. He'd shown up at the restaurant, tracked her phone, she admitted, and made a scene. Said she was embarrassing him, making him look like he didn't matter. In the parking lot, he grabbed her arm hard enough to leave marks. She sent me a photo. 5 distinct bruises, finger-shaped. I called Mom immediately. Put her on speaker so Emily could hear. Explained what I'd seen, what Emily had told me, what the bruises meant. Mom's voice went tight. Emily's always been dramatic. Tyler apologized, didn't he? He hurt her, I said. He got emotional. That's different from being abusive. You're making him sound like a criminal. Emily's face crumpled. That was the moment I understood. My mother wasn't going to protect her. She was going to protect the illusion of normalcy, even if it meant sacrificing Emily's safety. Tyler called me an hour later. His voice was calm, measured, almost friendly. He wanted to clear things up, he said. Explained that Emily had been difficult lately, that he'd been under stress, that sometimes people misunderstood his intensity. He never apologized, never acknowledged the bruises, just reframed everything until he was the victim. Then his tone shifted, just slightly. I appreciate your concern, but Emily and I can handle our relationship. You should focus on your career. Not a request. A warning. I'd seen this escalation curve in deployment scenarios: isolation, control, intimidation, threat. Tyler was on step 3. Step 4 was violence. I told Emily she could stay with me as long as she needed. She hesitated, torn between fear and the guilt he'd cultivated in her. Mom called it an overreaction. Said I was being paranoid. Said Tyler was a good man who'd made one mistake. One mistake. As if the bruises, the tracking, the constant surveillance, the slow erosion of Emily's autonomy were all one isolated incident. Emily moved in 3 days later, carrying 2 bags and an expression I'd only seen on people in crisis: hollowed out, uncertain, stripped of the confidence she used to carry so easily. Tyler texted her 47 times that first day. Called from 6 different numbers. Sent flowers with a card that said, "I can't breathe without you." Mom called it romantic. I called it a threat. I installed additional locks. Checked the windows. Made sure Emily knew the safety plan if he showed up. She thought I was being extreme. But I'd spent years learning that preparation isn't paranoia, it's survival. Tyler drove past my house twice that week. Slow, deliberate passes. The second time, he stopped in front, engine idling, staring at the windows. I stood in the doorway where he could see me. Waited until he drove off. Mom came by to tell Emily she was being unfair. That Tyler deserved a chance to explain himself properly. That relationships required forgiveness. Emily listened silently, and I watched her shrink into herself, becoming smaller with every word. After Mom left, Emily asked me if I thought she was overreacting. If maybe she'd misunderstood. If Tyler really was just stressed and she'd been too sensitive. I looked at the bruises, still fading yellow-green on her arm. You didn't misunderstand anything, I said. She cried then, quietly, as if even her tears needed permission. I thought about all the times I'd assessed threats professionally, made calls that kept people safe, trusted my training over popular opinion. This wasn't different. The uniform didn't matter. The target did. Tyler was escalating. Mom was enabling. Emily was trapped between fear and the desperate hope that maybe everyone else was right, maybe she was wrong, maybe love was supposed to hurt this much. I knew better. And I knew what came next. Emily and I were different in ways that mattered. She was the peacekeeper, the one who smoothed over family tensions and made sure everyone felt comfortable. I was the one who left at 18, who chose structure and hierarchy and a career that demanded precision. Growing up, we'd been close despite the gap. 5 years separated us, but we'd shared a bedroom until I left for the Air Force Academy. She used to ask me questions about everything: how planes worked, why rank mattered, what it felt like to be responsible for other people's lives. She loved the certainty of it, the clear rules. Home was different. Mom worked doubles as a nurse, stretched every dollar, did her best with what she had. But there were no clear rules, no structure. Just survival and adaptation, and Emily learning early that keeping peace meant bending. She got good at it. Too good. By the time I came home on leave after my first deployment, Emily had perfected the art of making herself smaller so everyone else could be comfortable. She'd abandoned art school to stay close to home. She worked administrative jobs she hated because they were stable. She dated men who needed fixing because she'd learned to equate care with sacrifice. Mom relied on Emily completely. Not maliciously, just habitually. Emily became the emotional center of the family, the one who remembered birthdays and organized dinners and checked in when things got hard. She never complained. I don't think it occurred to her that she could. I progressed through ranks, captain to major to lieutenant colonel, while Emily stayed home, building a life around other people's needs. When I'd visit, she'd ask about command structures and deployment rotations with the same fascination she'd had as a kid. I think she craved the order I'd found, the clear expectations and defined boundaries. So when she ended up with Tyler, I saw it immediately, a man who used control as affection, who demanded complete availability and called it devotion. Emily, trained since childhood to prioritize everyone else's comfort, was perfect prey. Mom didn't see it that way. To her, Tyler's intensity was passion. His need for constant contact was romantic. His opinions about Emily's clothes and friends and schedule were just him being involved. Mom had spent decades in a profession that demanded she anticipate needs and prevent problems. She saw Tyler's behavior through that lens, preventive care, not control. I tried explaining the pattern. Showed her articles about coercive relationships, statistics about escalation, professional assessments of what Tyler's behavior indicated. She dismissed all of it. Said I was too analytical, too suspicious, too damaged by my career to recognize normal relationship dynamics. The word damaged stuck with me, as if seeing danger clearly was a defect. Emily and I spent those first weeks rebuilding something we'd lost. She'd stayed home while I deployed, and the distance had been more than geographic. We'd grown into different versions of ourselves, her soft and accommodating, me sharp and certain. But underneath, we were still the sisters who'd shared a room, who'd stayed up late talking about futures that felt impossible and exciting. She told me about Tyler slowly, in pieces. How he'd been charming at first, attentive and interested. How gradually he'd started needing to know where she was, who she was with, what she was doing. How his compliments had shifted into criticisms framed as concern. How his apologies always came with explanations that somehow made his behavior her fault. She'd thought it was normal. She'd thought relationships required sacrifice. She'd thought love meant accommodating someone else's needs above your own. I recognized the logic. It was the same logic that kept people in toxic command structures, that made junior officers doubt their own assessments when senior leaders contradicted them. Authority plus insistence equals doubt. Emily had doubted herself until the bruises made denial impossible. But even with evidence, she struggled. She'd been trained her whole life to keep peace, to not cause problems, to believe that her discomfort was less important than someone else's feelings. Breaking that programming took more than leaving. It took rewiring every instinct she'd developed. Mom visited twice that first month. Both times, she tried gentle persuasion. Suggested Emily was being hasty. Mentioned that Tyler had called her crying, devastated, promising to change. Implied that walking away was cruel, that everyone deserved forgiveness, that relationships required work. I watched Emily's face during these conversations. Watched her waver, consider going back, calculate whether her fear was proportionate or exaggerated. Watched her rebuild walls I'd spent weeks helping her dismantle. After the second visit, I asked Mom directly, if Emily were your patient, and she came in with bruises and said her boyfriend tracked her location and showed up everywhere uninvited and grabbed her hard enough to hurt her, what would you tell her? Mom's face shifted. For a second, professional assessment overrode personal denial. Then she looked away. That's different. It's not. She left without answering. Emily heard the whole conversation. That night, she said quietly, she doesn't want it to be true. I know. She thinks if she admits it, she failed somehow. Like she should have seen it. I understood then that Mom's denial wasn't about Tyler. It was about her own guilt, for liking him, for encouraging Emily, for missing signs she'd been trained to recognize in strangers, but couldn't see in her own daughter's boyfriend. The betrayal wasn't that Mom didn't believe Emily. It was that she chose not to. Emily stayed with me, and slowly, carefully, she began to recover. Emily decided to file for a restraining order. The process was clinical, procedural, exactly the kind of structure I understood. We gathered evidence, texts, call logs, photos of the bruises, statements from neighbors who'd seen Tyler's car idling outside my house. The hearing was set for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, Tyler's behavior escalated in predictable ways. He sent letters, long, handwritten pages about how much he loved her, how he couldn't live without her, how she was destroying him. The language oscillated between devotion and accusation, often within the same paragraph. Emily would read them and spiral, questioning whether she was being cruel, whether she owed him another chance. I explained that this was standard abuser behavior, intermittent reinforcement, designed to keep her emotionally destabilized. She knew intellectually that I was right. But knowing and believing are different things when you've been conditioned to prioritize someone else's pain over your own safety. Tyler called Mom constantly, told her he was going to therapy, getting help, becoming the man Emily deserved. Mom relayed these updates to Emily with barely concealed hope. Emily would listen and then look at me, torn between what she'd lived through and what everyone wanted her to believe. I didn't pressure her, just reminded her what the bruises had looked like. What his texts actually said beneath the romantic language. What patterns I'd seen in dozens of threat assessments that started exactly like this. He's not going to stop, I said. Men like him don't stop until they're forced to. She knew I was right. But knowing and accepting required her to give up the last shred of hope that maybe, somehow, this could end without conflict. The restraining order was granted. Tyler was served at work. According to his colleagues, word traveled through Mom's network. He'd been humiliated, furious, insistent that Emily was lying. He called Mom afterward. She told me later, her voice careful, that he'd sounded devastated. I asked if he'd sounded angry. She hesitated. Maybe, but mostly hurt. Hurt men don't stalk. Hurt men don't track. Hurt men don't show up uninvited with increasing frequency. Dangerous men do. I reinforced security, checked locks twice a day, kept my phone charged and nearby constantly, made sure Emily knew the fastest exits from every room. She thought I was being paranoid. I thought I was being responsible. 2 weeks after the restraining order, Tyler texted Emily from a new number. I know you're at your sister's. You think she can protect you? Emily's hands shook so badly she dropped the phone. I picked it up, screenshot the message, sent it to the detective assigned to our case. Then I checked every window, every door, every potential entry point. I called Mom, told her exactly what Tyler had written. Her response, he's just upset. He wouldn't actually do anything. How do you know? She didn't answer. I said, I need you to hear me. Tyler is escalating. The restraining order didn't stop him. It humiliated him. He's going to do something, and when he does, I need to know you won't make excuses for him. Her voice got tight. You're being dramatic. I'm describing a threat pattern. This is what I do. This is what I'm trained for. And I'm telling you, he is going to escalate. She hung up. Emily sat on the couch, arms wrapped around herself. What if she's right? What if I'm making him worse by— No, I said firmly. You didn't make him anything. He chose every single action he's taken. You leaving didn't create his behavior. It exposed it. That night, I didn't sleep. I positioned myself where I could see the front door and the hallway to Emily's room. Kept my phone within reach. Listened for sounds that didn't belong. Emily came out around 0200 hours. Couldn't sleep either. We sat in the dark living room, not talking, just present. She leaned against my shoulder the way she used to when we were kids, when thunderstorms scared her, and I'd promise nothing bad would happen while I was there. I couldn't promise that anymore. But I could prepare. And I could make sure that when Tyler came, because men like him always came, I'd be ready. The consequences for Tyler weren't legal yet. They were social, professional, reputational. Word spread through mutual networks that he was struggling with a breakup. Some people sympathized. Others, who'd seen his behavior up close, quietly distanced themselves. His job performance suffered. His supervisor, someone Mom knew peripherally, mentioned concerns about his focus, his temper, his erratic behavior. Tyler blamed Emily for all of it, which confirmed everything I'd assessed about his psychology: external locus of control, inability to accept responsibility, tendency to frame himself as victim even while actively threatening someone. Meanwhile, Emily started showing signs of actual recovery. She ate full meals without prompting. She slept through most nights. She laughed at something on TV, a genuine laugh, not performed. She started talking about the future in concrete terms, maybe going back to school, maybe moving somewhere new, maybe reclaiming the art she'd abandoned. Mom noticed the change. Started asking careful questions, testing whether Emily might soften, might consider forgiving Tyler if he really changed this time. I intervened before Emily could respond, asked Mom bluntly whether she cared more about Tyler's redemption than Emily's safety. Mom looked stricken. That's not fair. It's completely fair. You keep giving him credit for promises while ignoring everything he's actually done. She left upset. Emily cried afterward, caught between relief that I'd said it and guilt that it needed saying. The detective called with an update. Tyler had been questioned about the text message. He'd claimed it was a misunderstanding, that he'd just meant he was worried about Emily's judgment, not that he was threatening her. The detective didn't believe him but couldn't arrest him for a text message that was technically ambiguous. He's testing boundaries, the detective said. Seeing what he can get away with. You should prepare for him to push further. I asked what prepare meant legally. The detective was honest. Unless he physically shows up or makes an explicit threat, our hands are tied. Document everything. Stay vigilant. And trust your instincts. My instincts said Tyler would come. Maybe not today, maybe not this week, but inevitably. Men who built their identity around control didn't walk away when that control was challenged. They escalated. I ran scenarios. If he came during the day while I was out, Emily knew to lock herself in the bathroom and call 911. If he came at night, she knew to stay in her room while I handled the situation. I walked through the plan repeatedly until it was automatic. Emily asked once if I thought I was overreacting. If maybe Tyler would just move on. I wanted to lie. Wanted to tell her she was safe, that it was over, that men like Tyler eventually gave up. But I'd spent my career valuing truth over comfort. No, I said. He won't move on. And no, I'm not overreacting. She nodded slowly. Didn't argue. I think she already knew. The waiting was its own kind of violence. Not physical, but psychological. Every car that drove past too slowly, every unexpected sound, every notification on Emily's phone, all of it triggered the same spike of adrenaline, the same assessment protocol. I started sleeping in shifts, never more than a few hours at a time. Kept my boots next to the bed. Checked the perimeter before dawn every morning. Emily noticed, but didn't comment. I think she found it reassuring, evidence that someone was taking the threat seriously. Mom came by once more, ostensibly to drop off mail. Really, I think, to assess the situation. She saw the reinforced locks, the security cameras I'd installed, the way Emily and I moved through the house with constant awareness. You really think he'd come here? She asked. Yes. But the restraining order is a piece of paper. It doesn't stop someone determined to violate it. It just gives us legal recourse afterward. Mom's face crumpled slightly. I think that was when she finally understood. The rules she believed in, the systems she trusted, didn't actually protect people. They documented harm after it happened. Prevention required something else entirely. She stayed for an hour, quieter than usual. When she left, she hugged Emily longer than normal and told her, "I'm sorry I didn't listen earlier." Emily cried after she left. Not sad tears, something more complicated. Relief, grief, anger, forgiveness, all mixed together in a way that didn't resolve into neat categories. That night, Emily asked me, "When do you think it'll happen?" I didn't pretend not to understand. I don't know. But when it does, I'll be ready. She believed me. That was enough. Tyler went silent for 3 days. No calls, no texts, no drive-bys. The sudden absence felt louder than the constant presence had been. Emily relaxed slightly, started hoping maybe it was over. I knew better. In military operations, silence before an assault isn't peaceful, it's preparation. The enemy goes quiet while they finalize strategy, gather resources, wait for optimal conditions. I maintained security protocol. Checked locks, monitored cameras, stayed alert. Emily thought I was being excessive. I thought I was being realistic. On the 4th day, the motion sensor light near the front door triggered at 0300 hours. I was awake immediately, moving to the window. Saw nothing. Could have been an animal, could have been wind. Could have been someone testing our awareness. The next morning, I found a footprint in the dirt near the back steps. Too large to be Emily's or mine. Recent, the edges were still sharp, not weathered. I took photos, sent them to the detective. He said he'd document it, but couldn't prove whose footprint it was. I reinforced the back door, added another lock, trimmed the bushes that could provide cover. Emily noticed my increased vigilance, but didn't ask questions. I think she understood that acknowledging it out loud would make it more real, more terrifying. Mom called to say Tyler had shown up at her house looking for Emily. She told him Emily wasn't there, but he lingered on the porch, asking questions, trying to confirm where Emily had gone. Mom had felt uncomfortable enough to call progress, I thought, that she finally recognized the behavior as threatening rather than romantic. "Did you call the police?" I asked. "No. He left when I asked him to. Next time, call them." She promised she would. I didn't entirely believe her. That night, I briefed Emily on enhanced protocols. Keep curtains closed after dark. Don't answer the door for anyone. If she heard anything unusual, come get me immediately. She listened seriously, nodded, didn't argue. Around 2200 hours, I heard a car idling on our street. Went to the window, stayed back from the glass, watched. Tyler's car, parked 3 houses down. Engine running. Him visible in the driver's seat, staring at our house. He stayed for 11 minutes. Then drove away slowly, deliberately, making sure we'd see. Emily had seen too. She came into the living room, pale, shaking slightly. "He's not going to stop, is he?" "No." "So what do? We wait. We stay alert. And when he makes his move, we make sure he regrets it." She looked at me for a long moment. "You sound like you want him to come." I considered that. I don't want it. But I'm prepared for it. And there's a certain relief in that, knowing I've done everything possible to ensure we're ready. She nodded slowly. Didn't look comforted, exactly, but maybe reassured that someone was thinking tactically instead of emotionally. I promoted to lieutenant colonel around this time, 05, a milestone I'd worked toward for years. Under normal circumstances, we'd have celebrated. Instead, I changed security passwords, upgraded the camera system, and reviewed emergency protocols. Emily tried to congratulate me anyway. Made a small cake, found a card somewhere. I appreciated the effort, the attempt at normalcy. But we both knew celebration was premature. You don't celebrate victories until the threat is neutralized. That night, I couldn't sleep. Kept running scenarios, calculating response times, identifying tactical advantages and vulnerabilities. The front door was reinforced, but not impenetrable. The windows were locked, but glass breaks easily. If Tyler came during the day, we had neighbors within shouting distance. If he came at night, we were more isolated. I chose my position carefully. If he came through the front door, the most likely entry point given his psychology, his need to be direct and confrontational, I'd be positioned in the hallway with clear sight lines and multiple exit options. I ran through responses. If he came in aggressive, I'd use verbal de-escalation first, command voice, clear directives, establishing authority. If he came in violent, I'd use the minimum force necessary to control the situation until police arrived. Emily appeared in the doorway around 0100 hours. "Can't sleep either?" "No." She sat next to me in the dark hallway. "This feels surreal. Like we're preparing for war in suburban America." "Violence doesn't care about the setting," I said. "It happens where it happens. Better to be prepared and wrong than unprepared and right." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "I'm sorry I brought this into your life." "You didn't bring anything." "He did." "And Emily," I waited until she looked at me. "I'd rather be here, prepared, protecting you, than anywhere else in the world wondering if you were safe." She cried quietly. I let her. Grief and fear and gratitude all mixed together in a way that didn't need words. Around 0300 hours, I heard it. Footsteps on the porch. Slow, deliberate, not trying to be quiet. Then a bang on the door. Not a knock, a demand. Emily jumped. I was already moving, positioning myself exactly where I'd planned. Another bang. Then Tyler's voice, loud, "Emily. I know you're in there. We need to talk." Emily started to stand. I motioned her back. "Stay in your room. Lock the door. Call 911. Now." She hesitated only a second, then moved. Tyler banged again, harder. Then I heard it, the crack of wood, the splinter of frame. He was kicking the door in. I stayed positioned, waited, controlled my breathing. Ran through protocols automatically. Assess, communicate, escalate only as necessary. The door gave. Tyler stepped inside, confident, entitled, convinced Emily would be cowering somewhere. He didn't expect resistance. He called her name again, moving further into the house. I stepped into his sightline. Calm. Centered. Every bit of training settling into place. Wrong house, predator. He froze. Stared at me like I was an unexpected obstacle, something he hadn't planned for. You need to leave, I said. Command voice, clear, authoritative. Now. He tried to rally, to reassert control. This is between me and Emily. You don't. I'm giving you one opportunity to walk out that door before the police arrive. They're already on their way. You can leave now and deal with the consequences of breaking and entering, or you can stay and add assault to your charges. Choose carefully. He looked past me, still looking for Emily, still convinced this was negotiable. She's not coming out, I said. And you're not going further into this house. The only direction you're moving is backward, toward that door. His face shifted confusion, anger, the dawning realization that his plan was failing. Men like Tyler relied on women being afraid, being smaller, being alone. I wasn't any of those things. He took a step toward me, testing. I didn't move. Didn't flinch. Just held his gaze with the same expression I'd used on subordinates who thought rank was negotiable. Last chance, I said quietly. Walk out. He heard sirens then, still distant but approaching. His confidence cracked. He looked at the broken door at me, calculated his options, and found them all bad. He backed toward the door. This isn't over. Yes, I said. It is. He left. Stumbled down the steps, got in his car, drove off just as the police turned onto our street. The arrest happened quickly. Tyler was stopped 2 blocks away, charged with breaking and entering, violating a restraining order, criminal trespass. The evidence was overwhelming. The broken door, the 911 call, my statement, Emily's testimony. He spent the night in jail. Bail hearing the next morning. Mom called, shaken, finally seeing clearly what she'd refused to acknowledge for months. Emily came out of her room once the police left. Looked at the broken door, at me, at the place where Tyler had stood expecting to find her vulnerable and alone. You were ready, she said quietly. I was prepared. There's a difference? Ready suggests eagerness. Prepared means accepting reality and acting accordingly. She hugged me then, hard, the way she used to when we were kids, and something scared her, and I'd promised nothing bad would happen. I'd kept that promise. Not by preventing the threat, that had been inevitable, but by being exactly where I needed to be when it materialized. The days after were procedural. Police reports, court dates, protective orders reinforced. Tyler's lawyer tried negotiating, suggesting Emily had invited conflict by leaving, that Tyler had only wanted to talk. The judge wasn't interested. The broken door, the violated restraining order, the clear escalation pattern, all of it spoke louder than Tyler's justifications. He was sentenced to 6 months, with mandatory counseling and a permanent restraining order. Not enough, maybe, but something. Evidence that actions had consequences, that women weren't required to accept violence as the cost of relationship. Mom came by the morning after his sentencing. Looked at the repaired door, at Emily sitting calmly on the couch, at me making coffee like this was ordinary morning routine. I'm sorry, she said quietly. For not believing you. For not seeing it. For making Emily feel like she was the problem. Emily looked at her for a long moment. I needed you to believe me the first time. I know. I needed you to choose my safety over your comfort. I know. Mom cried then, the kind of tears that come from genuine remorse, not self-pity. Emily let her cry, didn't offer immediate forgiveness, didn't smooth it over to make Mom feel better. She was learning boundaries, learning that other people's feelings weren't her responsibility. Eventually, Emily said, we can rebuild from here. But it has to be different. Mom nodded. It will be. I promise. I watched them carefully navigate this new dynamic, this unfamiliar honesty. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't easy. But it was real. Over the following weeks, Emily transformed in small, significant ways. She laughed more easily. She started painting again, filling the house with color and texture. She talked about going back to school, maybe studying art therapy, using what she'd survived to help others. She was still healing. Trauma doesn't resolve on linear timelines, but she was moving forward instead of just surviving. Mom visited regularly, rebuilding trust through consistency rather than grand gestures. She didn't make excuses anymore. She asked questions and listened to answers. She acknowledged when she was wrong. The relationship between them was different now, more honest, less reflexively accommodating. I returned to duty eventually, fleet responsibilities, command decisions, the weight of rank and expectation. But something had shifted in me too. I'd spent my career protecting people strategically, from a distance, through policy and protocol. This was different. This was personal, immediate, the kind of protection that happened in hallways and dark rooms and split-second decisions. Both mattered. Both required the same core skill, seeing threats clearly and acting accordingly, regardless of who wanted you to look away. The detective called a few weeks later. Tyler had violated his restraining order again, driven past Emily's old apartment, tried contacting her through fake profiles. The violations added time to his sentence, reinforced that the courts were watching. Emily's response was telling. She didn't panic, didn't spiral, didn't question whether she'd been too harsh. She simply documented it, reported it, and went back to her painting. She'd learned that her safety wasn't negotiable, that people who violated boundaries faced consequences, that she wasn't responsible for managing other people's choices. Mom asked once if I thought Tyler would ever change. I was honest, I don't know. But it's not Emily's job to find out. Mom nodded slowly. I spent so long thinking relationships required tolerance. I didn't realize tolerance could be dangerous. Tolerance is for differences, not for abuse. She repeated that quietly, like she was memorizing it. 6 months later, Emily moved into her own apartment. Not because she needed to leave my house, but because she was ready to build something independently. We set up security together, locks, cameras, emergency protocols, but the preparation felt different now. Not frantic, not fearful. Just practical. Adult women living in the world, taking reasonable precautions. The night before she moved, we sat on the couch like we used to when she first arrived, quiet, comfortable, present. "Thank you," she said finally, "for believing me when no one else did. I wish I'd seen it sooner. You saw it exactly when I needed you to. You didn't try to talk me into staying. You didn't minimize it. You just prepared for reality instead of hoping it wouldn't happen." I thought about that. About the difference between hope and preparation, optimism and denial. About how loving someone sometimes means accepting difficult truths and acting on them, even when everyone else calls you paranoid. You know what I learned? Emily continued. That safety isn't something you earn. It's something you deserve automatically, just by existing. And if someone threatens that, it's not your job to manage their feelings about losing access to you. She'd learned that lesson through pain. But she'd learned it. That mattered. The day she moved, Mom helped carry boxes. The three of us worked together, rebuilding something that had fractured. Not perfectly, trauma leaves marks, but genuinely. I watched Emily arrange her new space, choosing where things went, making decisions based on her preferences rather than anyone else's requirements. She was different now. Steadier. More certain. Still gentle, but no longer equating gentleness with submission. That evening, I returned to my house. It felt quieter without Emily, but not empty. Just ready for whatever came next. I thought about Tyler occasionally, wondered if he'd actually learned anything or just learned to hide better. Didn't really matter. He wasn't Emily's problem anymore. She'd built a life separate from his reach, built boundaries he couldn't cross, built a version of herself that refused to shrink for anyone's comfort. Mom called one night, months later. Said she'd met someone new, asked if I'd meet him. I said yes, but I'd be watching. She laughed, not offended. I'd expect nothing less. She'd learned too. That vigilance isn't distrust, that boundaries aren't cruelty, that protecting people you love sometimes means acknowledging uncomfortable truths instead of smoothing them over. Emily thrived. Got accepted into a graduate program. Started dating someone who respected her schedule, her space, her autonomy. Brought him by once so I could meet him. I asked careful questions, watched body language, assessed intent. He passed. Seemed genuinely decent, genuinely interested in Emily as a person rather than as something to control. Afterward, Emily said, "I knew you were evaluating him." Of course. It didn't bother me. It felt safe. Like someone was making sure I didn't miss red flags again. Did I miss any? She smiled. No. He's good. Actually good, not good if I squint and ignore the warning signs good. That distinction mattered. She learned to tell the difference. I returned to my career with a different perspective. Still valued protocol, structure, rank. But understood more deeply that all the training in the world matters less than being willing to see clearly and act when it counts. Years of tactical education, threat assessment, command experience, all of it crystallized in that hallway, facing down a man who thought intimidation was strength, who thought Emily was his to reclaim, who thought I'd step aside. He'd been wrong about all of it. I didn't protect Emily because I outranked him in some metaphorical sense. I protected her because she'd asked for help and I'd believed her. Because when someone whispers, "I'm scared," the only correct response is, "I'm here." The strongest thing you can do isn't always the most dramatic. Sometimes it's just believing someone the first time they tell you they're in danger. Sometimes it's preparation instead of optimism. Sometimes it's standing in a dark hallway, calm and certain, making it clear that some lines are not negotiable. Tyler had crossed that line. He learned, too late, that control isn't power and intimidation isn't strength. Real strength is quieter than that. It's Emily rebuilding her life. It's mom learning to listen instead of dismiss. It's standing in the space between threat and harm, prepared and certain, refusing to move. That night replayed in my mind sometimes, not as trauma, but as confirmation. I'd spent my career training for moments of decision, moments where clarity mattered more than hesitation. This hadn't been deployment. It had been home. But the principles were identical: assess, prepare, act. 40 years is a long time to carry a story. Long enough that the sharp edges soften, that perspective shifts, that people you thought would be permanent fixtures fade into memory, while others remain constant in ways that surprise you. I'm 74 now. Retired from the Navy for over 2 decades, though I still carry the rank in how I move through the world, spine straight, shoulders back, assessing rooms automatically even when there's no tactical reason to do so. Some habits don't retire, even when you do. Emily is 69, living in Oregon with her wife of 30 years. They have a small art therapy practice together, working primarily with survivors of domestic violence. She paints every day, large canvases full of color and movement that somehow capture both pain and hope without tipping into sentimentality. Her work has been featured in galleries, not because she pursued recognition, but because people recognized something true in what she created. We talk every Sunday. Video calls now, technology that would have seemed impossible back then. She looks happy in a way that still catches me off guard sometimes, genuinely content, not performing contentment to make others comfortable. Her hair has gone silver, and she wears it long, pulled back while she works. She laughs easily, makes terrible puns, sends me photos of her garden where she grows vegetables with the same care she once gave to making herself smaller. The transformation wasn't instant. Healing never is. But over decades, I watched her build a life so fundamentally different from the one Tyler tried to trap her in that sometimes I forget how afraid she used to be. Then she'll mention something, a client who reminds her of herself, a new story about a woman killed by an ex-partner, a date that coincides with an anniversary she doesn't name, but I remember, and I'll see the shadow of what she survived still there, integrated rather than erased. Mom passed away 11 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, diagnosed too late for intervention to matter much. The last 6 months, Emily and I took turns staying with her. She was lucid until near the end, grateful for the time, apologetic in ways that had stopped being about Tyler and become about all the smaller moments she wished she'd handled differently. One afternoon, about 3 weeks before she died, she asked me if I'd forgiven her. We were sitting in her hospice room, light filtering through thin curtains, the beep of monitors providing rhythm to the silence. For what, specifically? I asked. For not believing Emily sooner. For making you feel like you were the problem instead of Tyler. I'd had 40 years to think about it. I forgave you a long time ago. You were operating with the tools you had. You didn't have malicious intent, you had blind spots. We all do. She nodded slowly, eyes closed. I think about that night constantly. What would have happened if you hadn't been there? But I was there. Because Emily got lucky. Because she had you. She had you too, eventually. You learned. You changed. That matters. Mom cried then, quiet tears that tracked down her face without drama. I don't know if I changed enough. Or fast enough. Change doesn't have a speed requirement. You did the work. You showed up differently afterward. Emily forgave you. That's what counts. She squeezed my hand. Her grip was weak, nothing like the firm handshakes she used to give her nursing colleagues, but the intention was clear. You were always so certain. Even as a kid. I envied that. Certainty is easier in a uniform. Clear hierarchy, defined expectations. Real life is messier. You made it look simple. It wasn't. I was terrified that night. She opened her eyes, surprised. You were. Of course. I knew what I was trained to do, but knowing and doing are different when it's your sister at risk. When failure means something you can't take back. You didn't show it. That was the training. We sat quietly after that, her hand in mine, both of us thinking about the versions of ourselves from 4 decades prior, younger, more certain, carrying different kinds of fear. Before she died, Mom made us promise to stay close. Not that we needed the prompt. Emily and I had rebuilt something strong enough to survive distance and time. But I think Mom needed to believe she hadn't permanently damaged what we had, that her mistakes hadn't fractured us beyond repair. We promised. And we kept it. Tyler died 6 years ago. Heart attack at 66, sudden and final. I learned about it through a mutual acquaintance who thought we'd want to know. Emily's response was complicated, not grief exactly, but not celebration either. Relief, maybe. The confirmation that he was gone, that there'd be no late-life attempt at contact, no deathbed apology seeking absolution he hadn't earned. She told me later I thought I'd feel more. Vindication or closure or something. But mostly I just felt tired. Like I'd been carrying this low-level awareness of him for 40 years, and suddenly that weight was gone. You don't owe him any particular feeling, I said. Not even at his death. I know. It just seems strange that someone who loomed so large in my life for a while can disappear so completely. But that's the thing about abusers, they're only as powerful as the fear they generate. Once Emily stopped being afraid, once she built a life he couldn't touch, he became irrelevant. His death just made that irrelevance official. I never married. Came close once, our relationship with a naval officer that lasted 7 years before we both admitted we were better as colleagues than partners. I don't regret it. I had a career I loved, relationships that mattered, a life full of purpose and challenge and occasional joy. The traditional markers of success never appealed to me the way they were supposed to. People ask sometimes if I was lonely. I never knew how to explain that solitude and loneliness aren't the same thing. I had Emily, had friends, had colleagues who became family through shared deployments and crises. I had a life rich with connection, even if it didn't look like the conventional template. Retirement was harder than I expected. Not because I missed the work exactly, but because I missed the structure. 40-plus years of clear expectations, defined roles, measurable outcomes, and then suddenly nothing but time and the expectation that I'd find it fulfilling. I struggled the first year. Tried hobbies that felt pointless. Volunteered for organizations that needed my skills, but didn't challenge me. Felt adrift in a way I never had, even during the worst deployments. Emily noticed. She called one Sunday and said, "You sound miserable." "I'm fine." "Mona, you're talking to me. Don't perform fine." I laughed to spite myself. Retirement is strange. I thought I'd enjoy it more. You spent your entire adult life with a mission. Now you don't have one. That's disorienting. So what do? Find a new mission. Something that matters to you. Doesn't have to be military, doesn't have to be grand. Just something that gives structure to your days and purpose to your time. I thought about that for weeks. Considered and discarded dozens of options. Then I started volunteering at a Veterans Crisis Center, helping former service members transition back to civilian life. Not therapy exactly, I wasn't qualified for that, but practical guidance from someone who understood the military mindset and the challenges of leaving it behind. It helped. Gave me structure, purpose, the satisfaction of using decades of experience in service of something meaningful. I worked there for 15 years, until my own health required me to step back. The heart attack came 3 years ago. Not massive, but significant enough to require surgery and recalibration of my entire approach to life. The recovery was long, frustrating, punctuated by Emily's daily calls and her wife Sarah's gentle insistence that accepting help wasn't weakness. I learned, slowly, to let people care for me. To admit vulnerability without framing it as failure. To understand that strength isn't always about standing alone, sometimes it's about standing together. Emily flew out to stay with me for 2 months during recovery. We fell into easy rhythms, her cooking, me reading aloud, both of us watching terrible reality television and critiquing the manufactured drama. It felt like those early weeks after she left Tyler, that same careful rebuilding, except this time I was the one being rebuilt. One evening, she said, "I'm glad I can be here for you. You don't owe me anything, Emily." I know. That's not why I'm here. I'm here because I love you and you need help, and that's what people do for each other. Such a simple statement. Such a profound shift from the woman who used to believe love meant accepting harm. We talked more during those months than we had in years. About Mom, about the military, about the choices we'd made and the ones we'd been forced into. About Tyler occasionally, though he felt more like a historical figure than a real person by then, someone who existed in the past, whose impact had faded to scar tissue rather than active wound. Emily asked once if I ever regretted not having a different life. Marriage, kids, the conventional path. No, I said honestly. I chose the life that fit me. I don't regret that. Do you think you would have made different choices if Tyler hadn't happened? I considered that. Maybe. Or maybe Tyler clarified what was already true, that I was always going to prioritize protection over convention. That I was always going to trust my assessment over other people's comfort. You saved my life. You saved your own life. I just made sure you had the space to do it. She cried a little, not sad tears, but the kind that come from recognizing something true. I spent so many years thinking I was broken because I needed help. I didn't understand that accepting help when you need it is actually strength. You taught me that too, I said. Just took me 40 years and a heart attack to learn it. We laughed then, the kind of laughter that acknowledges pain without being consumed by it. Last year, Emily published a memoir. Not about Tyler specifically, but about her journey from people-pleasing to boundaries, from fear to agency. She interviewed me for it, asked questions I'd never considered about my own motivations and choices. "Why did you believe me immediately?" she asked during one interview session. "Because you said you were scared." That was enough. A lot of people would have asked for more proof. I had proof. Your voice. Your body language. The bruises. The pattern. I didn't need a confession from Tyler to validate what I could see clearly. She wrote that into the book. Dedicated a chapter to it, the importance of believing survivors immediately, of not requiring proof beyond their word that they're in danger. The book did well. Not bestseller level, but solid enough that she's invited to speak at conferences, at universities, at organizations working with survivors. I've watched some of her talks online. She's poised, articulate, vulnerable without being fragile. She tells her story not for sympathy but for strategy. Here's what happened, here's what helped, here's what made it harder, here's what you can do differently. She mentions me sometimes, always carefully, always with my permission. Talks about the importance of having someone in your corner who trusts your judgment, who prepares for worst-case scenarios without judgment, who stands between threat and harm without hesitation. I'm proud of her in ways I can't fully articulate. Not just for surviving, though that matters, but for transforming survival into purpose, for using what hurt her to help others, for refusing to let Tyler's violence be the final word on who she became. We're planning a trip together next year, assuming my health cooperates. Train journey across Canada, slow and scenic, no agenda beyond being together. Sarah's coming too, and my ex-partner Jennifer, who stayed a friend even after the relationship ended. For women in our 70s, carrying decades of history, taking time to just exist without urgency or mission. I find myself thinking about time differently now. 40 years seemed impossibly long when I was 34, standing in that hallway, certain of my training but uncertain of the outcome. Now 40 years feels like both forever and an instant, long enough to build entire lives, short enough that the memory of Emily's fear still feels immediate. I wonder sometimes what I'd tell my younger self if I could. Probably nothing. She wouldn't have listened, too certain in her own assessment. But maybe I'd tell her that the moment in the hallway wasn't the end of the story, just a pivot point. That Emily would be fine. Better than fine. That Mom would learn and change and apologize and die loved. That Tyler would become irrelevant, his power dissolving the moment Emily stopped granting it to him. Maybe I'd tell her that the military career she was building would matter, but not in the ways she expected. That the real impact wouldn't be measured in rank or deployments, but in quieter moments, believing someone who needed belief, standing firm when others wavered, preparing for threats others insisted were imaginary. Or maybe I'd tell her what Emily told me during my recovery, that strength isn't always loud, that asking for help isn't weakness, that the most important battles often happen in hallways and hospitals and quiet conversations that no one else witnesses. But probably I'd just tell her to trust herself. She had good instincts, even when everyone suggested those instincts were paranoia. She saw clearly when others preferred denial. She prepared when others hoped. She stood firm when it mattered most. That's enough. Emily called this morning, excited about a new project, a collaboration with a filmmaker who wants to document stories of survivors who rebuilt their lives. She asked if I'd participate, share my perspective as the person who intervened. What would you even say? I asked. Whatever feels true. Your experience of that night. What you were thinking. What you'd want people to know. I'm considering it. Not for attention or recognition, but because maybe there's value in showing that protection doesn't have to be perfect to be effective. That training helps, but isn't everything. That believing someone when they say they're in danger is the most important first step. And maybe there's value in showing what happens after, not just the dramatic confrontation, but the decades of healing and growth and ordinary life that follows. The trips and phone calls and gradual transformation of trauma into just another part of a much larger story. Because that's the thing nobody tells you about crisis moments, they're rarely the end. Usually, they're the beginning of something longer and harder and more complicated than the crisis itself. The confrontation lasted minutes. The healing took decades. Both mattered. Neither was more real than the other. I look at photos sometimes from that period. Me in uniform, younger and more certain than I felt internally. Emily thin and scared, eyes haunted in ways I didn't fully recognize at the time. Mom trying to smile through tension she couldn't quite hide. And then photos from last year. Emily with silver hair and laugh lines, holding Sarah's hand at their anniversary party. Me slower but steadier, surrounded by friends I've accumulated over decades. Mom's memorial service, sad but celebrating a life fully lived despite its mistakes. The contrast is striking. Not just physical aging, but the fundamental difference in how we all inhabited our lives. Emily used to make herself smaller to avoid conflict. Now she takes up space unapologetically, paints with bold strokes, speaks her truth without apologizing for its impact. I used to believe certainty was the highest virtue. Now I know uncertainty acknowledged honestly is stronger than false confidence. Mom learned too, before she died. Learned that protecting people sometimes means facing uncomfortable truths. Learned that her daughter's safety mattered more than her own comfort with denial. It took longer than it should have, but she learned. I think about Tyler less now than I probably should given his impact on our family. But he's become what he always should have been, a footnote, a cautionary tale, evidence that dangerous men exist and must be taken seriously. He's not the main character of Emily's story. He's barely a supporting character. He's just the obstacle she had to overcome on her way to becoming who she was always meant to be. The real story isn't about him. It's about Emily finding her voice. It's about Mom learning to listen. It's about me understanding that protecting people isn't about dramatic confrontations, though those happen, but about consistent presence, unwavering belief, and the willingness to see threats clearly even when everyone else insists you're overreacting. It's about what happens after the crisis, after the restraining order, after the conviction. It's about the slow, unglamorous work of rebuilding trust and establishing boundaries and learning that safety is a right, not a reward for good behavior. It's about 4 decades of Sunday phone calls and birthday visits and ordinary moments that accumulate into an extraordinary life. Emily asks sometimes if I feel like I missed out, choosing career over family in the traditional sense. I tell her what I believe, that family isn't just biology or legal contracts. It's commitment, presence, showing up when it matters. By that measure, I've had more family than most people ever find. I have Emily, transformed and thriving, building a life of purpose from pain. I have Sarah, who loves Emily with a steadiness Tyler couldn't comprehend. I have former sailors who still call me for advice, colleagues who became friends, a chosen family built across decades and deployments and shared challenges. I have a life that fits me, even if it doesn't fit expectations. Next month, I'm moving closer to Emily and Sarah. Not in with them, we all value our independence too much for that, but nearby. Close enough for weekly dinners, close enough to help if needed, close enough to just be present without constant travel wearing me down. It feels right. The career is over. The mission is complete. Now there's just time, precious, finite, unpredictable time, and the choice to spend it with people who matter. Emily's already planning projects we can do together. Art classes, volunteering, maybe co-facilitating some workshops for her clients who want to hear from someone who intervened successfully. I'm not sure I have much to teach, but I'm willing to try. Sarah jokes that they're acquiring me like a protective older sister who comes with the package. She's not wrong. I've spent my whole life protecting Emily in one way or another. Not because she needs constant protection anymore. She's built her own strength, established her own boundaries, created her own safety. But because that's what family does. We protect each other, not from capability but from love. 40 years. Long enough to watch a terrified woman become a confident survivor. Long enough to watch a career-focused officer become an elder with stories to share. Long enough to understand that the dramatic moments are important, but the quiet accumulation of ordinary days matters more. That night in the hallway was important. It probably saved Emily's life, or at least prevented serious harm. But the 40 years after, the Sunday calls, the visits, the slow rebuild of trust, the gradual understanding that we're all works in progress, making the best decisions we can with limited information, that's what really saved her. Not the confrontation. The consistency. Not the drama. The presence. Not the uniform. The unwavering belief that she deserved safety and support and space to heal at her own pace. I'm 74. My heart is weaker than it used to be. My knees protest stares. My memory occasionally misplaces details that used to be immediate. But I remember exactly how Emily looked that night she knocked on my door, terrified and ashamed and desperate. I remember Mom's voice insisting everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. I remember Tyler's face when he realized I wasn't going to step aside. And I remember the decades after, slower, quieter, ultimately more meaningful than those intense months of crisis. Emily is 69, thriving, loved, purposeful. That's the victory. Not the confrontation. The life she built afterward. The woman she became once she had space to figure out who that was. I'm proud of her. I'm proud of Mom for learning, even if it took longer than ideal. I'm even proud of myself, though that's harder to admit. Proud that I trusted my assessment, stood firm, prepared thoroughly, and gave Emily the protection she needed while she learned to protect herself. 40 years later, we're still here. Still connected. Still showing up for each other in whatever ways matter at this stage of life. Tyler's gone. Mom's gone. But Emily and I remain older, wiser, carrying our scars with something approaching grace. That night in the hallway mattered. But this matters more. Sunday phone calls, planned train trips, ordinary conversations between sisters who survived different things and chose to build something meaningful from what remained. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is believe someone the first time they whisper they're scared. And then keep believing them, keep showing up, keep being present for whatever comes next. 40 years. Still showing up. Still present. That's the real victory. That was the night everything shifted for us, when fear stopped winning and clarity finally took over. If you've ever had to protect someone you love, or walk away from someone who refused to hear the truth, I'd love to know. Have you ever seen red flags before anyone else did? Did someone dismiss your fear or their own? And what finally pushed you to take action? Share your experience in the comments. Your story might help someone who's still stuck in theirs. If this resonated, hit like, subscribe, and stick around for more real stories about strength, boundaries, and choosing safety over silence.